Well, have you ever actually stopped to think about how we make sense of the human past? I mean, we kind of just take it for granted, right? We assume the historical accounts we read are these perfectly objective reflections of exactly what happened. But, the truth is far more complex, layered, and honestly, a whole lot more fascinating. So today, we're going to unravel this incredibly intricate relationship between the past itself and the stories we actually tell about it.
Okay, to kick things off, here's a weird question for you. Did Christopher Columbus sneeze an even or odd number of times on his first Atlantic crossing? Now, there is absolutely a factual answer to this, right? It literally happened one way or the other. But does it matter? Of course not. It is completely irrelevant to our grand historical narrative. We just don't care, and so it doesn't make it into the history books.
And that illustrates our first major realization today. Facts only matter if we actually care about them. Historians don't just act like giant vacuum cleaners, objectively sucking up every single tiny fact from the past. If they did, our textbooks would be filled with, sneeze counts. Instead, they actively select facts based on what they consider important to the specific narrative they're trying to build.
Our journey today is totally grounded in this fantastic resource, a companion to the philosophy of history and historiography, edited by Aviezer Tucker. This massive Blackwell volume features some truly brilliant minds, folks like Peter Casso and Zdeněk Vašíček, who painstakingly unpack exactly how we construct our knowledge of the past. It's going to be our ultimate guide as we navigate through these tricky philosophical waters.
So, here's our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll start by clearing up some messy terminology, move right into how we actually know about the past, examine the tricky nature of facts and bias, pivots to the grand meanings and metaphysics of history, and finally, we'll look at how different cultures visualize time itself.
All right, let's dive into Section 1, clearing the terminological mess.
Because before we can really understand the past, we have to fix a major glitch in how we talk about it. In everyday English, we use the word history to mean way too many different things, and it creates this incredible mess. So we really need to draw a strict line here. First, we have history, and that's the actual unobservable events and processes of the past, the sheer physical reality of what went down. Then, on the flip side, we have historiography, which refers to the texts, narratives, and writings created by humans about that past. We absolutely have to separate the actual gone-forever events from the textual representations we create today.
Moving right along to Section 2, Historiography, Knowing the Past.
This is where the real detective work begins. Because how can we reliably know anything about a past that is dead, gone, and literally impossible to observe? Philosopher R.G. Collingwood hit the nail on the head when he said, "All history is the history of thought." Think about it. When we study the human past, we aren't just looking at rocks or planetary orbits. We're looking at people. People who had their own intentions, values, and mental states. To truly understand past actions, historians have to somehow figure out what those people were actually thinking. It's like trying to bridge this massive gap between the physical evidence left behind and the invisible mental realities of the folks who created it.
Honestly, the historian's job is remarkably similar to being on a courtroom jury. Just like a jury has to evaluate witness testimony and physical evidence to decide a verdict on a past crime they didn't see, the historian evaluates textual documents and material remains to judge the authenticity of historical events. In both cases, they are trying their best to accurately describe something they didn't personally witness.
Which leads us perfectly into Section 3, Facts, Evidence, and Bias.
So how does this evidence actually survive the brutal passage of time? Well, historical evidence has to pass through 3 really severe filters before it ever reaches your textbook. First up is natural decay. Stone and ceramics easily outlast paper and wood, so our physical record is naturally going to be totally lopsided. Second, we have victor's bias. The written record was intentionally created by the literate, the powerful, and the wealthy. We very rarely get to hear from everyday commoners. And third, the historian's bias. Even if evidence survives those first 2 filters, a modern historian still has to actively select it based on what our modern culture deems relevant. Philosopher Arthur Danto summed this up perfectly. He said, "One does not go naked into the archives." I love that quote. It means historians always bring their own cultural baggage, their professional training, and their theoretical frameworks right into the archives with them when they interpret evidence. Pure, passive objectivity? Yeah, it's a total myth. The very language a historian chooses to describe a past event instantly injects modern concepts into that past reality.
All right, let's pivot a bit for Section 4, History, Meaning, and Metaphysics.
We are shifting from the epistemology of how we know the past to the substantive philosophy of what the past actually means. Substantive philosophy of history is this ancient, enduring search for ultimate meaning. It looks directly at the grand, sweeping arc of human events and asks the big questions. Is there a direction here? Is it necessary? Is there an overarching goal to human existence, or is it all just random, chaotic noise? Thinkers have wrestled with this for centuries, basically trying to find a master blueprint behind the rise and fall of civilizations.
One way some thinkers have tried to make sense of all this is through something called the covering law model. Now, in science, you explain why a helium balloon rises by pointing to the universal law of buoyancy, right? Well, some philosophers tried to apply this exact same logic directly to human history. They suggested that historical events are really just instances of general, inescapable social laws. But as you can probably guess, this idea often clashes violently with the sheer unpredictability of human free will and the absolute uniqueness of historical events. We just aren't as predictable as helium balloons.
And you know, our search for this meaning has evolved dramatically over time. Back in ancient mythic times, events were seen as completely cyclic and guided by the gods. Moving into antiquity, epic narratives started introducing these ideas of common human law. Then, by the 16th century, thinkers like Machiavelli shifted gears toward empirical studies of political customs. Finally, by the time we hit 18th century modernity, history was totally reconceived as a linear, autonomous, and endlessly progressive march forward.
And that brings us perfectly to our final section, time, cycles versus lines. Because how we visualize the literal shape of time completely dictates how we write historiography. Historically, there have been two deeply contrasting views of time. In ancient Eastern thought, like in China and India, time was predominantly viewed as cyclical. It's super focused on nature, eternal return, and karmic law. Basically, things repeat, and the present moment is what truly matters. In sharp contrast, Western and monotheistic traditions developed a linear view of time. This view has a definitive beginning, epic narratives filled with major turning points, final judgments, and a relentless focus on endless future progress. The shape of time you inherently believe in completely dictates the kind of history you're going to write.
So that brings us to our final, really provocative question, one that Peter Casso leaves us to wrestle with. Do we discover the human past, or do we construct it? Knowing the severe filters our evidence has to pass through, and all those modern biases we carry right into the archives, is the history you read an objective reality you're just discovering, or is it a carefully curated human invention? I'll leave you to ponder that one. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember, keep questioning everything you read.